stability. Ask most players playing Star Citizen what they want, and the number one thing that seems to pop up is stability. And last week, the testing season of 4.0 began with up to 1,000 player shards using server meshing. While the player cap may not go that high when 4.0 hits live, server meshing is arguably the single biggest blocker to the game reaching further stability. While there are other things, server meshing is big, as mentioned here by one of the folks leading the initiative.
For sure, like the most immediate gain there is server meshing for sure. Like we've seen in our playtest significant frame rate increase across the board for areas. This is all bound on entity count and also physical entity count. So server meshing is from the top is going to reduce that count by a lot because you have way less areas to simulate. So less entities to simulate means that the overall wait time across the frame will be better.
So let's talk about these server meshing tests, Star Citizen stability, and where we go from here. Thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk. Now, the first thing to note is that recently the roadmap update brought the Zeus ES and CL into the 3.24 branch of updates, along with the new MFD UI updates. This makes it pretty clear that while server meshing is in testing, 4.0 itself will definitely not be going to the live servers by CitizenCon or likely IAE in late November. Thus, we're seeing new features and ships moved up from the 4.0 update that don't need to go out during that time. And we'll know about that second deadline of IAE for sure whenever CIG admits to what update the Polaris is coming in, since, you know.
So the Polaris is going to be flight ready, fully released at IAE this year. Not 4.0.
But for whatever the patch number for Invictus is.
Yeah.
What happens if you don't make it?
It will come out at IAE.
What happens if you don't make it, Ben?
He's my boss, it will come out at IE.
So we are possibly looking at a December live release of 4.0 with a possible subsequent 4.0.1 update to stabilize things towards the end of the month, if we're pretty lucky. This could mean a few things for the game going into the new year. There are a lot of fears that 4.0 will release and the whole studio will go on break, leaving the game in shambles. While server meshing might enable more stability in the game by offloading a lot of processes from a single server in the longer term, that first launch could be pretty rough. But there are a couple different reasons this scenario might not happen. First, CIG understands how important 4.0 is. This is easily the most important release in the game's history. While 3.0 was also a big moment, introducing Planet Tech and many of the systems that have been updated this year, the optics, size of the community, and attention the game gets were nowhere near what they are now. Additionally, 4.0 has been anticipated for 7+ years after so many different messages about it's coming next year and don't worry, we're on the road for Pyro. Now that it's actually in testing and a realistic goal for the company, I think they recognize all those false alarms have built up a lot of expectations. With server meshing finally beginning public testing, we are in for a long haul of various tests and waves to get the game to a playable state in a server meshed environment. We could be looking at 3+ whole months of this back and forth testing. For that reason, the worst case scenario at this point is looking like an open PTU launch in December while the live servers remain on 3.24 to allow for even more testing at the end of that 3+ months. This would be similar to the 3.18 launch a couple years ago, hopefully not the live release part, that hurt. But rather with anybody being able to access the patch if they want starting in December. For many of you, this doesn't count as 4.0 coming out in Q4, but like I said, this seems like the bad path now. Then there are also the hot fixes we could see. While CIG might get 4.0 into a good enough state and want to go live in December, we have actually seen December patches get small updates to fix bugs and stabilize before the new year. Specifically, 3.12 had a bug fix patch drop on Christmas Eve in order to make things a bit better before the offices closed for the holidays. Shout out to the devs who are working that late, and I'm sure this won't solve every problem, but specifically the things that make a patch unbearable do sometimes get figured out within a couple of weeks of that live release. This is because even after all the PTU testing cycles, there's nothing quite like releasing an update to the entire community. As the CTO and head of Turbulent Studios, Benoit Beauzé-Georges, suggested in a recent Star Citizen Live regarding 3.24.
Some of them work well, on internal builds, and then when we get real players on it, there's always something new.
All this being said though, it is in your best interest to still expect a rough and drawn out launch for 4.0, just to set yourself up for whatever might happen. In my opinion, 4.0 is too important a patch to not have a smooth release. Smooth-ish. So the next couple of months are very crucial for the game, but always expect the worst, it's just being safe. And no matter how the launch goes, server meshing and 4.0 being the top priorities for the next major launch thus mean the top priorities for the future of the game are improved stability and a higher player count. And these are two of the most important things the game needs to be an environment the players who actually enjoy Star Citizen can have a better time in. Better AI, more reliable physics, game systems that rely on a solid back end, elevators, trains, and missions that can finally be updated after years of waiting. This milestone allows the company to start renovating and improving a lot of what has been holding the game experience back. And with the Zeus ships moved to 3.24.2, we now basically have confirmation that update will come after IAE. But how is that early testing of server meshing going so far with the 1,000 players in a shard together? Before we do talk about the server mesh tests going on, it's good to talk about the big change that these tests were waiting for, as talked about again by Benoit. RMQ, which is the replication layer messaging service that keeps everything in the game up to date across all meshed servers, has actually been running in the background of the game for almost all of 3.24 testing over the last few months. This confirmation is good news for the back end of the game, as it's actually been running quite well. Kinda. Mostly. And it now runs the 3.24 live game, which you may or may not have noticed improved stability in. As for the server meshing tests, the biggest difference we are seeing with these tests compared to the server meshing tests earlier this year is, like I said, the implementation of the RMQ. I won't go into detail about what this is, but on surface level, it's an iteration of the way the game communicates with the back end to explain what needs to happen and when, regarding player actions, game events, etc. Now, I didn't get to take place in these tests themselves, but I watched a couple of them, and from what I've been told, the game performed quite well up until around 350 players were in the shard together. Now, quite well is relevant. At 350 player instances, the game was mostly playable, which is a good place to be compared to where we are now, but nowhere near any MMO aspirations. At that point, things were still a bit rough, and some of the systems that were used to being broken were still kind of broken. There's a lot that needs to be updated to fit into the game along with server meshing. But at this point, we could probably see a new star system put into place, that being Pyro, with 200 players, as well as an additional 200 in Stanton. This would immediately double the amount of players you are used to seeing in a single star system, while adding yet another one with the same amount of players, creating more gameplay opportunities. This test also reportedly showed 30 frames per second tick rate on the server, which, if you watched my video at the beginning of this year about server meshing, is one of the biggest shortcomings of things like AI performance and general game stability. It has also been repeated by various devs throughout the year.
For 4.0 with server meshing, we expect higher server frame rates, so the idea is that you'll get a much more engaging AI experience.
But like I said, things weren't perfect. The transit system refactor still seems to be needed, as trains and elevators were pretty unstable, and the mission system wasn't even functional, showing that the refactor for that is also not performing well enough for testing. So there are some issues here and there that need to be figured out over the coming months. While the goal is improved stability, the first step is just making sure the game runs as well as it does on this entirely new back end. Much like with persistent entity streaming in 3.18, the goal is not just to nail a dramatic improvement with the first iteration, but more to reach the same level of performance with some improvements here and there over what we had with the previous system, that being 3.24. But we're seeing a clear increase in player concurrency as well as game server tick rate compared to the live environment, and we aren't entirely aware of the limiting bounds here. This first test, like I said, is taking part in just the Stanton system, with 3 to 4 servers for 350 players. It's arguable that more servers would need to be added given more geometric space in a different star system, so this could very easily scale up, but I don't know these things well enough to say with any certainty. What I have been told is that past this 350 to 400 player mark, the latency of actions began to become much more noticeable, taking several seconds up to 600 players and 10 plus seconds up near the 1000 player mark, basically making the game unplayable. So CIG was able to push the system to some limit in this early test, allowing them to get all the data they needed within just 6 hours. But we can see very clear improvement to what was shown earlier this year regarding latency, and a massive improvement to server tick rate over non-server meshed game states that we are currently playing in 3.24. And luckily, breaking this system was the whole point of the tests. So I look forward to hearing back from them, hopefully pretty quickly, what this means for them going forward. There's clearly still a ton of work that needs to be done for server meshing to scale beyond just marginal bumps in player counts and game stability. The fact that these are the forefront most important topics in Star Citizen's development right now should be a huge plus to many players though, and while it's frustrating that the name of the game is still waiting at this point, I'm very happy to know that server meshing is finally in wider testing, and the road to more stability in Star Citizen is actually a major focus. This is a very important time for the game, and while there continues to be turbulence in the development, we've never been closer to actually seeing the goal of static server meshing achieved. Hopefully, this is the first step towards proper stability in the game, and a real expansion into an MMO. But what does that road look like? Will it be 4.1, 4.2, or even further down the line in 4.4 that we really start to see the overall state of the game improve? Or do you think the stability of the game will just never take a step up? Let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments, and if you'd like to continue following the development of the game, getting high quality news and opinions, consider subscribing here. And if you want more long-form content like feature deep dives and podcasts, like my most recent episode bringing Avenger 1 on to talk about master modes and the flight model in Star Citizen, check out my second channel, Space Tomato 2. Otherwise, thank you for checking out this quick news update. I hope you learned something new in this video, and I'll catch you in the next.